Good afternoon. I'm Jeffrey Archer, Dean of University Libraries, Museums, and the Press. I want to welcome you to the Fall 2023 Keston Lecture, War, Music, and Dissonance, a Czechoslovak case study of Michaela Kufová. I want to thank Dr. Elizabeth Flowers and the J.M. Dawson Institute of Church State Studies for co-sponsoring today's event. Note that today's lecture is being live streamed as well as recorded for later viewing. I would ask that the Keston Center staff and students please stand for a moment as we recognize them for their work. And then I'm calling Associate Professor Kathy Hillman, Director of the Keston Center for Religion, Politics, and Society for remarks about Keston.
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today. You know, today's Keston lecture honors and celebrates Central Texas Czech heritage. How many of you have ever enjoyed a fruit kolache or made a stop at a purchase at Slovaček's or at the Czech stop? Okay, raise your hand if you've done that. Okay, I have many times. Well, if so, you are a beneficiary of that Czech heritage. Aren't we glad they came to Texas? The Keston Center on the third floor of the Carroll Library is also a beneficiary. The beneficiary of a library and archive, which is the largest collection of artificially assembled materials about religious persecution under communism and other totalitarian regimes, some during wartime and others during the Cold War. The preponderance of that collection comes from the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact countries, of course, including Czechoslovakia, and contains materials from countries that speak at least 33 different languages. In 1969, the Reverend Canon Dr. Michael Bordeaux, an Anglican priest who had participated in the first student exchange program between Great Britain and Russia, the USSR, but he was in Moscow, 10 years earlier, founded Keston College because of his promise to believers in the Soviet Union to be the voice of the voiceless and to make known the needs of all religious believers and to uphold religious freedom. So the mission of Keston was to tell the truth by gathering and disseminating reliable information about the religious situation. Most notably, Keston documented persecution and the plight of dissident believers and clergy and lay people, many of them artists, poets, playwrights, and musicians, because their dangerous works captured the hearts of the people, of groups, and of whole countries. Its influence became legendary and evident in the struggle for liberty behind the Iron Curtain and in front of it. We all know that even from American history, don't we, the part that music has played. With the breakup of the Soviet Union in 1991, Keston began looking for a place for their library and archives because most of their funding dried up. The Keston News Service that had documented and disseminated the information about believers and the plight of the persecuted ceased operations, and they could no longer afford their library and archives in Oxford. They accepted Baylor's proposal in 2003, and in 2007, the precious materials came to the newly created Keston Center for Religion, Politics, and Society at Baylor University. We count that legacy and that heritage very precious. And so we continue to preserve the materials, to host researchers, to open our doors to visitors and scholars and family members. We recently had the son of a pastor from Ukraine his father had been imprisoned. And when he came to the Keston Center, he looked at some materials that our curator, Larissa Seco, had pulled, and he found materials in his own father's handwriting. And I can tell you there were lots of tears that day. So we continue to share that mission with Keston. And part of that mission you are participating in today, and that is in helping to explain what we do, what happened, and to offer Keston lectures on a variety of subjects. And we're really excited today that we're here, and that especially that you are here. We're delighted that you came and know you're going to have a good afternoon with us. So first, I'd like to introduce our introducer. You know, you have to introduce the introducer. Charlotte Laughlin, recently retired English professor at McLennan Community College, will introduce today's lecturer. A member of Phi Beta Kappa, Dr. Laughlin received her PhD at the University of Texas. She has been involved with MCC's exchange program with Masaryk University in Brno, Czech Republic, where she has been both a visiting and a regular professor and instructor. And I think you've also taught the course there on individualism and community in American culture and literature. Is that correct? American Lit class, but you add a little culture and a few other things to it. That was the theme. And after the lecture, we will have a Q&A session moderated by Steve Gardner. Steve is the Keston Advisory Board Chair, Professor Emeritus of Economics, and immediate past director of the McBride Center for International Business. So he will do that following the lecture. So sit back, relax, and enjoy.
I am really happy to be here to see such a fine crowd. This is wonderful. And I'm really happy to introduce Michaela Kufová. I've learned you emphasize the first syllable of the Czech name, Kufová, today. I met her through McLennan Community College's exchange program with Masaryk University in Brno, Czech Republic. I am a little embarrassed to admit I'd never heard of either one of them before I started teaching at MCC, but Brno is the second largest city in the Czech Republic, second only to Prague, and Masaryk University is second only to University of Prague. It's the second largest. I didn't, like most Americans, I'm still just pretty ignorant of most European history and culture and politics and religion. We know quite a bit about England, but that's about it. I did know about John Hus, the Czech Bible translator and religious reformer. I learned about him in my Methodist Bible schools, but he predates Martin Luther, predates John Wycliffe, and there is a memorial to him because he was executed. There's the memorial there at Prague. That was not on my introduction that I have written out. It's a real danger to ever ask a former English professor to get to the podium because we'd never know when to be quiet. But I will go back to Michaela. While attending MCC in the fall of 2018, Michaela sang in the MCC choir. She worked part-time in an MCC office. She became involved with Baylor's Keston Center for Religion, Politics, and Society, and she still managed to make straight A's in all of her courses. I had all three of the Czech exchange students, three beautiful young women, in my children's lit class, and they all were wonderful students. She went back to Masaryk University and completed her master's degree in both English and music, And I will tell you, they do a great deal more work for their master's degree than I did for my master's at the University of Texas. And that was back in the day. Anyway, she completed that, and she has continued to combine teaching with research into the role of music in the Czech people's long struggle for independence, freedom of religion, and linguistic identity. And it has been a long struggle. The land and people of Czechia were controlled by the Habsburg Empire for 300 years or more. And Czech culture and even Czech language were repressed. But the Czech people kept singing their songs, and so the language was preserved. Only the remaking of Europe after World War I, the destruction of Europe after World War I, and the efforts of Thomas Masaryk and Edvard Beneš, who were the first two presidents of the Czech Republic, but their efforts to create an independent homeland, then known as Czechoslovakia, which I was ignorant enough to still be calling Czechoslovakia in 2000, whatever, long after it had been formed into the Czech Republic. They were Czech immigrants, just like our Czech American group here in Central Texas, and they were in the Midwest. They all through the middle section of the United States. They were in the Chicago area, and like me, they were professors and could talk a lot. So their efforts brought about the establishment of an independent Czechoslovakia in 1918. And that's what is now the Czech Republic and what is now Slovakia. Related peoples, but wanted their own countries. But they only enjoyed 21 years of independence before 1939 and the onslaught of Nazi Germany, which took over Czechoslovakia. They were overrun, occupied, and suffered terribly under the Nazis of Adolf Hitler. The end of World War II brought liberation from the Nazis, but the purpose of the Keston Center, related to the purpose of the Keston Center, the Russian army took over Czechoslovakia, and they occupied from 1945 till 1989. After the 1980s, American foreign policy weakened the USSR. Brave Czechs and Slovaks took to the streets to demand that Russia leave their country. Their street protests are known as the Velvet Revolution, and many of the professors Michaela had at Masaryk University, and some of whom are my friends, participated in that brief peaceful revolution. And during those demonstrations, our friends and her professors sang the songs of Czech musicians whose music had been banned by the Russian occupation and whose music Michaela is faithfully researching and preserving, just as the Keston Center faithfully preserves the history of religious struggles. So let us now welcome Michaela Kufová as she gives us a Czechoslovak case study of war, music, and dissonance. Help me welcome her.
Hello, everyone. Howdy. I thought it would be a nice beginning. Thank you for joining me here today. I'm really happy to see that so many of you came for my lecture, and I'm really happy to speak here and to talk about history of my country, of music from my country. So thank you again. In this lecture, we are going to start a journey through Czechoslovak's history from roughly 1938 until 1989. This period was marked by political turmoil, wars, social changes, but also an unwavering musical spirit. We will explore the connection between these events and the music that both reflected and shaped my nation's history. But first, before we start, let me tell you something about myself. I was born in a free country, which is a very important thing to mention today, because my childhood was very different from, for example, my parents' childhood. When I was 5 years old, I began singing in one of the top Czech choirs, Czech Republic's choirs, children choirs. That allowed me to travel to different countries throughout Europe and the whole world. But that was almost unthinkable when my mom was young, because the international traveling was essentially forbidden. The borders were closed, they were guarded by soldiers, and you just simply couldn't wake up and say, oh, I'm going to travel to Austria or UK or France. You just couldn't. I got to study university. I was privileged enough to study university. I got to choose my own career path, and that all was determined by my skills, my knowledge and abilities, not by my political opinions or by my parents' actions, political actions. But today, we are here to talk about music. Today, we have Apple Music, Spotify, YouTube. We have almost unlimited choices. We can listen to any song we want from all corners of the whole world. But back then, the things were more complicated than that today. If you wanted to listen, for example, to Beatles, in Czechoslovakia, there was almost no official way how to do so. My parents told me stories about illicit ways how they obtained tapes of music. They borrowed it from friend to friend, re-recorded them so they can keep them at home and listen to them in secret. Yeah, so the world was different. And today we are going to dive into even more history and more far in history. So let me just, okay. So wars bring changes, political changes, social changes, economical changes. And these changes happened during the World War II because technology boomed, science boomed, but also did the feelings of depression, desperation, loneliness. And music reflected those feelings, and the music evolved. We had new genres like Impressionism, timbre music, but also neoclassicism, which sought for stability and a return to the classical elements, rhythms, and melodies and harmonies. But war did not only affect the music itself, but also lives of composers. And we are going to talk about one particular composer, and that is Gideon Klein. Gideon Klein was a Jewish boy born in 1919 in a little town called Přerov. From a young age, his musical talents were very apparent. He was a prodigy in piano, and his music was his destiny, or like music was his destiny, and he wanted to study music and pursue career in music. So he moved to Prague. However, he was born in a wrong time, because in 1939, the Nazis occupied the Czechoslovakia, and Nuremberg laws came into effect. Those laws forbade Jews from doing many things. You couldn't, if you were a Jew, you couldn't go to simply a cinema. You couldn't own a business, a property. You had to wear a yellow star on your clothes to everybody see that you were a Jew. And of course, you couldn't study. You couldn't study university. So young Gideon was forbade to study music and pursue career. But nevertheless, he composed music, he wrote songs, he played piano, and also he performed, but under a pseudonym, because he couldn't do it as a Jew publicly. However, in December 1941, he was moved to Terezín, which was a Jewish ghetto in Czechoslovakia. Also, his sister followed him in 1942, and he had to spend some time there. At the beginning, he took care for people there. He took care for children without parents. He taught them music. He went on composing music in secret. They even had performances in secret. But Nazis eventually found out. And because music is a good tool for keeping people, hopeful, music gave them really hope and a sense of beauty in a place of despair. So they eventually let music to be a part of Terezin's life, and they used this music for propaganda purposes to see and to show the world that Terezin is a beautiful place to live in. Well, it wasn't. But the Klein siblings also did a remarkable thing because they documented music history in Terezin. So we have now a really essential source of knowledge, what happened there, because there were like concerts and performances. And now we know. But in October 1944, he was moved to Auschwitz. And just a few months before the end of the war, in spring of 1945, he was murdered at the age of 25. But Gideon Klein's musical talents, both as pianist and composer, even in the darkest of time, left a lasting legacy, and we should never forget about him. Post-war, now, in the years following the World War II, Czechoslovakia has found itself navigating through complex currents of post-war Europe. This period from 1948 till 1968 is again marked by political changes, because after a series of complex and complicated political actions, the communist power secured its position for more than 40-year-long era. And that brought many changes culturally, socially, economically. But one of the things is very important, and we are going to talk about it more, and that's censorship. Censorship was imposed not only on text, literature, but also music and theater. There was a state control that controlled what is being published, what can be sung, what you can hear, you can watch on TV or listen to on radio. And only a few approved artists were allowed to perform publicly. And also there was this time of tension because there was always present the shadow of Cold War. But always there is a hope. And we had hope in the spring of 1968, when there was a time of political liberalization and we could see changes for better. The term Prague Spring was coined by Western media. It relates to the spring season, awakening, hope. Also, it relates to Prague music festival, Prague Spring. So this was time of liberalization. However, these hopes were shattered by events in August 1968, when Soviet army, Russian army came across our borders and started to occupy us again. My dad told me a story because he was a young boy back then. He was 10 years old, not even 10 years old. And he told me stories because they just moved from village, from really small village, to a bigger city. And his mom told him not to go anywhere because, the Russian came and tanks and soldiers. So obviously he was a 10-year-old boy, so he had to go. So he went to the city's square to see the soldiers. And the soldiers didn't even know where they are. They didn't know what's happening. So that's interesting for me, that we need to look at everyone, not with the view as a soldier, but also there were people, young boys who left their country for a strange thing and a strange cause. We call this period a normalization. So when I talk about something, when I say normalization, this is the period from 1968. And censorship spared neither culture in these times. Music that did not align with the regime's ideology was oppressed, suppressed, and musical groups had to face a dilemma, either to conform to the demands, to cease their activity, or risk encountering problems. But now let's talk about music in Czechoslovakia. We had 3 types of music back then. One was the official way, the alternative music way, and underground. When we talk about official music scene, it was characterized primarily by massiveness, because those singers and groups they were allowed to perform on an official way, on an official music scene, they had access to radio, TV, their records were released and could be sold officially, but also it wasn't that easy because all of their work was state controlled, supervised, if it's ideological harmless. And a typical phenomenon happened that only a few personalities had that dominant position, and especially Karel Gott, which you can see in the middle picture, or Hanna Zagorová or Helena Ondrášková. Those were the main people, personages in that official music scene. But even in this official stream, we could hear or we could see some changes and some Western influence because Western culture was forbidden. Okay, so there was almost no official way how to, listen to Western music. But still at some point we could hear and we could see some trends coming from the West culture, and we can talk about cultural transfer between West and the East. So there was ideological supervision who decided which trends from the Western culture can be brought to Czechoslovakia that gain more prominence, that can gain some prominence. And we will talk about 3 types. First of all was disco music. Because of these almost repeating melodies, there are really undemanding lyrics, easy slogan-like lyrics, so they don't convey any harmful message. So disco music could gain some prominence and was very popular in the 1980s in Czechoslovakia. We can talk about jazz. And that was really interesting for me because I didn't know before that jazz, not about jazz, but that jazz could gain some prominence in Czechoslovakia, because jazz was, the origin of jazz is by back then oppressed minority in the USA. So they really liked that the communist government really liked the fact that the West is now the bad guy. So they could really brought jazz to Czechoslovakia. And pop music. Because pop music's purpose is also massiveness and mass consumption, the themes of the songs are usually about love and friendship and really easygoing life. So it doesn't really harm the communist regime. So those 3 genres gained more prominence in Czechoslovakia's official music scene. Now, in contrast to that, we have alternative music scene. And those bands they were not tolerated on the official music scene, but because they constantly pushed the boundaries, and they had to pass successfully qualification exams to show they can sing, again, harmless songs. Yeah, that's that. But they still performed Western music. They did cover versions for some songs in English, even in English, but they had to do it secretly. So they presented a list of repertoire for the qualification exam. If they passed, they could perform officially, but then they snuck out the songs they couldn't be played officially. So yeah, they were a little sneaky in that. We could also see this adopting new trends and adopting songs from Western culture even in the official scene. And they did it they took a song, they Czechified and translated the lyrics, but they kept the music. And then Czech singer, really sang the song. But we didn't know it was, from the USA or the UK, because the lyrics were Czech. And 20 years later, when we listened to some song, we found out the origin is in the United States or the UK. So imagine listening to some Beatles song, which was not sung by Beatles, by some Czech singer, because they had Czech lyrics, but the music was from Beatles. So that happened. And we are going to talk about one group, and that's Blue Effect. You could see them, those 4 guys in the right picture. It was a music band from the 1960s. And the name Blue Effect is based on a blue book. Are you interested in what the blue book is or was? Okay, in Czechoslovakia back then there was a mandatory military service for all the men, all the young men. But if you had a blue book, you didn't have to go. Usually it was for people with some, health problems. They wouldn't be able to, really experience the military service. But also if you had good contacts, if you could bribe somebody, you could really gain the blue book. And they really like kind of the idea, so they used the blue book as an inspiration for their name, Blue Effect. They were really influenced by jazz, and they had one particular song which made them very famous, and it's called Sunny Grave. But the band was really the song and the band eventually was forbidden by the government because they dedicated this song to Jan Palach. If you've ever heard the name, or if you haven't, doesn't matter. He was a young boy, young history student, who as a protest burned himself to death in the main of the Wenceslav Square in Prague, as a protest to what was happening during Prague Spring, before the Russian occupation and everything related to that. So he died as a protest to really awake the nation. And they dedicated this song to him. So immediately it was forbidden and banned by the government. But today we can listen to it. But the song was banned for almost 20 years. So let's enjoy a few moments with this song.
Usínám a chtěl bych se vrátit o nějaký ten rok zpátky, být zase malým klukem, který si rád hraje, který je s tebou.
So there was Blue Effect and their Sunny Grave. Now, the extreme pole of the official and the alternative was underground music. Those bands were really represented by the underground, and they were in direct opposition to the establishment. They didn't engage in dialogues between, the official culture, and they really wanted independence and freedom in speech and freedom of creativity. They just wanted the liberty. And of course, they were forbidden. We are going to talk about one group, the Plastic People of the Universe, which was a rock band, because this band is very important. They refused to comply with the request to alter their repertoire, to Czechify the name of the band, cut their hair, and it led to escalated conflicts with the authorities. In 1967, the Plastic People and the band members were arrested by the police, and they were brought to trial for hooliganism. A few of the members were released after a few weeks of detention, but they suffered from series of repressions, like they were fired from their jobs, their children couldn't get access to education, they lost their driving licenses. Some of them were really exiled, put to exile. 2 of the members were imprisoned for 8 and 18 months. And protests against this imprisonment eventually led to the formation of Charta 77, uniting opposition against the communist regime. So the band is really important in the actions that followed. But we talked about adopting new trends in music from Western culture, and we can talk about contact with the West, because one way is that it was forbidden officially, but the second way is the other side is that if you really couldn't have any contact. Well, you could. You could by radio broadcasts. In the 1950s, there was a network of jamming transmitters all around the Czechoslovakia, which they were not entirely effective. So you still could hear some Western radio broadcast. During the 1960s, signal jamming was gradually reduced. And during the Prague Spring, there were almost, they planned measures that would have put an end to all the jamming of foreign radio. However, then the August invasion came, so that really didn't happen. And during that period of normalization, the Czechoslovak radio became even more thoroughly controlled media platform. However, Western music could still be heard to some extent in domestic broadcasts. And again, my parents told me stories how they were sitting next to the radio, try to, find a right radio station and to listen really with bad quality, just like sounds, but they could hear some melodies and some notes of maybe Radio Free Europe. And that radio played a significant role during communist era in Czechoslovakia. It was established in 1949 and funded by the United States, and it was a powerful tool in encountering information blockade imposed by communist regimes. Its broadcast provided an essential lifeline for citizens in Czechoslovakia, because the state-controlled media really suppressed independent speech, independent reporting. But we can talk about Charta and its significance and what it was. So it was in a response to the imprisonment of musicians and the artists of Plastic People of the Universe when the Charta 77 emerged, uniting opposition against the communist regime. It is considered to be one of the most significant acts of resistance during the pre-1989 era of normalization. A group of intellectuals, including a playwright, Václav Havel, created a draft together that called for Czechoslovak government to really uphold its commitments to human rights and civil liberties. The communist government, of course, responded to Charta with repression, imprisoning many of the signatories and subject them to harassment and surveillance. Despite that, the movement continued to grow and gain international attention, which is really important because it played a crucial role in drawing attention to human rights abuses in Czechoslovakia and keeping pressure on the government to adhere to its commitments. And also it paved the way for broader opposition movements that eventually led to the Velvet Revolution of 1989 and fall of communism in Czechoslovakia. Several prominent musicians signed the Charta and supported the movement. One of them was Karel Kryl. You can see the guy with the guitar. So I'll tell you something about him because he's really close, not just only to my heart, but actually to my hometown, because he spent his childhood in my hometown. He was born in Kroměříž, but he lived in Nový Jičín for some time. He was an iconic Czechoslovak poet, songwriter, and he wrote many of his protest songs. Really, just a guy with a guitar, but his folk songs and his protest song were really criticizing the government and what was happening in Czechoslovakia. He had to spend 20 years of his life in exile. Another person who I'm going to talk about is Marta Kubišová, because she wrote a special song, and the song is called A Prayer for Marta. And this song holds a significant historical and emotional importance in the context of the 1989 Velvet Revolution. This song became an anthem of hope and resistance in the peaceful overthrow of the communist regime. The song lyrics convey a message of longing for freedom, for justice, and for better future. However, of course, it was banned and its performance was prohibited. But for now, let's listen to Karel Kryl and his playing the guitar. Also, he was considered to be next Bob Dylan.
Slunce je zlatou skobou na obloze přibitý. Pod sluncem sedlo kožený. sedlem kůň, pod koněm moje boty rozbitý a starý ruce sedřený. Dopředu jít s tou karavanou mraků, schovat svou pleš pod Stetson děravý, jen kousek jít, jen chvíli do soumraku, až tam, kde svítí město bělavý, jen kousek jít, jen chvíli.
Stop it the best, yeah. I wanted to add subtitles to the videos so you could really hear and know what the songs are about, but I think you can understand the music even without the words and the message it conveys. However, these are the lyrics of Prayer for Marta, and I wanted to include it in the video. So let peace still remain with this country. Let hatred, envy, grudge, fear, and strife cease. Let them cease. Now when your formerly lost rule over your things returns back to you, people, it returns back to you. During the Velvet Revolution in 1989, thousands and thousands of people, of Czechoslovak people, gathered at Wenceslav Square in Prague to protest against the government, the regime, and this particular song became its anthem, a symbol of unity and defiance. One of the most important people, and maybe probably the most important one I'm going to talk about today, is Václav Havel. Maybe you've heard the name before. He became the president of Czechoslovakia and Czech Republic, and it was really a symbol of transition from communism to democracy today we have. He was born in Prague, and he began his journey as a prominent figure in the world of literature and theater. He was a playwright, and he used humor as a part of his fight against the regime. His plays were really full of criticism towards the society and the politics and everything like that. So of course he was banned, he was forbidden, his plays were forbidden, he was imprisoned, he was under surveillance and harassment, but he was one of the key figures in the Charta movement, and he did not back down. He kept going, he kept fighting for the liberty he wanted for his country and for his people. And eventually they overthrew the government, the communism, and he was elected a president of Czechoslovakia, becoming the country's first non-communist president in almost 4 decades. So this is it for me. I'm really happy that I could be here today, but I really want you to listen to one song, to pray for Marta, to really think about what I told you today, maybe you've learned something new, and to really, grasp the message the song really conveys. Yeah, I think no words are needed.
Ať mír dál zůstává s touto krajinou. Zloba, závist, zášť, strach a svár, ty ať pominou, ať už pominou. Teď, když svá ztracená vláda věcí tvých zpět se k tobě navrátí, lidé navrátí. Z oblohy mrak zvolna odplouvá a každý sklízí sedbu svou. Modlitba má, ta ať promlouvá k srdcím, která zloby čas nespálil jak květy mráz, jak mráz. Ať mír dál zůstává s touto krajinou. Zloba, závist, zášť, strach a svár, ty ať pominou, ať už pominou. Teď, když tvá ztracená vláda věcí tvých zpět se k tobě navrátí, lidé navrátí.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Michaela. Steve Gardner who taught economics at Baylor for many years. And just a couple of quick comments. One is the connections across the region between Czechoslovakia, Czech Republic, and the rest of that region, where you had people like Karel Kryl, and in the Czech Republic, you had the Vladimir Vysotskys, for example, in the Soviet Union, who had a much more gravelly voice, but where Karel Kryl's voice was very beautiful. Vysotsky was this kind of tough-sounding guy, but you had these parallels across the region, but then also the connections that were mentioned between the region and Western music. I don't think you played anything by the Plastic People of the Universe, but they attributed some of their music to influences to the Velvet Underground and to Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention. When I listened to them, in 1968, the band Cream, Clapton and others, recorded the song White Room. And if you listen to White Room by Cream and listen to recordings of the Plastic People of the Universe, you'll hear a strong similarity between those styles. And just one other thing, what you said, it reminded me of, I visited the Soviet Union first time in 1980. And back at that time, when you were talking about the things that were sort of acceptable to the authorities and the things that were not, back at that time, it was okay for movies with Jane Fonda to be shown, because Jane Fonda had been critical of the Vietnam War, and so the communist authorities thought that anything that Jane Fonda did must be okay. And so you'd have these kind of goofy movies like Barbarella that could be seen in Soviet movie theaters for no particularly good reason. You know, it was just, there was a lot of randomness in the way that that kind of censorship worked. But just want to ask, what, for young people now in the Czech Republic, the history that you've just talked about, how well is any of this known by young people now?
I think it's well known. I think like all young people really, how to say it in like, how to put it in words, like we cherish our history. And I heard our ambassador 5 years ago saying a nice quote, that those who forget their history, they're condemned to repeat it. So I think in Czechoslovakia, we really pay attention to what has happened to us in past, so we could prevent them from happening again. So I think when I see these two guys from Czech Republic as well, I think like everybody knows its history in Czech Republic.
And do you still see that music is playing any political role in the Czech Republic today?
I think music is always a tool for like criticize things, to really, what are the words I'm looking for? Okay. Yeah, so I think music is always a tool for criticism. However, now I think the situation is much more like calmer than it was before. So now we don't have those huge things to, rebel against. But yeah, I think music is always a nice tool. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Want to open it to questions. I think we have one person here who's a current student from the Czech Republic. Was there something you'd like to say or ask right now?
Were you stressed before the lecture? Are you stressed?
Yes, I was. Yes, I was. I still am.
Well, beautiful job.
Thank you.
Are there other questions? I can go on, but other questions? Yes.
Steve, we do have questions online. Carolyn Rubenek asks, was church music restricted?
Was church music restricted?
Okay, I think this is a hard question, but a very good one, thank you. It was to some extent because communists really did not agree with the religion things. And I think it's also a part, like, this is the time in history when Czechoslovakia became more really declined from religion. So yes, it must have had impact. Yeah.
And generally, church activities altogether were restricted, unless you were connected with, just as you talked about the bands that were that had the approval for what they were doing throughout the region. You had the registered churches and the underground churches, and some could operate legally and others could not. And so those that could not operate legally became underground churches. Yes, another one, sorry. Right here.
Wonderful lecture.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing all this with us today.
Thank you.
My question is, how did classical music trends compare to these popular music trends that you presented here? So was, like, for instance, the Czech Philharmonic a vehicle maybe for, I don't know, a Czechoslovakian flavor of Soviet socialist realism or something like that?
Okay, so thank you for the question. So classical music was still a part of like music scene in Czechoslovakia, but I think in all countries it kind of was. It is now we can see that the classical music has, like a less influence on music itself, like the pop music and folk music, it all gained more prominence than classical music, but Czechoslovak Philharmonic is still a thing in Czech Republic now. So yes, if I answered your question at least a little bit. Yeah. Jak se máš? Výborně, děkuji. Yes, there was a rock music, punk music, but I think those bands were always the underground. It was not like the official way was really the pop music, maybe some rock, but slide rock. I think those punk bands, they really had those opinions for freedom, liberty. So communists didn't really like those. So it was underground, yes.
You could probably make a distinction between the alternative music around the time of Prague Spring versus the alternative music around coming up to 1989, because with the fall of communism, because by that time, punk music, all of that was spreading from the West, where back in '68, again, you were getting more of an influence from Bob Dylan and the Velvet Underground, sort of lighter music than was what would come later, along with all kinds of other influences. Yes.
Is there an artist from this time period that your parents enjoyed when you were young that they've introduced you to that you like?
Thank you. Karel Kryl. My dad really likes his songs, so he played them for me when I was younger. Yeah, so Karel Kryl.
I think one more question.
There's another online question.
Yes.
And Ramirez says, thank you very much. She says it in Czech, but she repeats it in English, so I assume that's what she's saying. How about, again, on classical music, the influence of Dvorak, Smetana, were they restricted under the communist regime or other regimes during the time?
Good question, thank you. I must say I don't know like entirely everything about this, but I would say that Smetana, because he was considered to be really a national composer, but he was also connected more to like folk music and based on nature and things like that. He also had music based on history. So history was part of his, like Braniboři v Čechách, and these kind of symphonic poems were based on history. So I don't think they could like erase it and erase him from, you know, the music scene, but I don't think they would gain more prominence in classical music. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michaela. I always learn a lot, and I really learned a lot today. And thank you, Dean Archer, for your part in the program and for supporting the Keston Center, Carl, and the media folks for making it so seamless with the PowerPoint and with the clips that were played. Now, some of you are here for CAE credit, okay? And you will need, who is here for CAE credit? Okay, well, you will need to see, Carl, would you stand up? This is the gentleman that you need to see to make sure that you get CAE credit for coming today. And we want to thank the Center for, Keston Center for sponsoring, but also the Institute of Church and State as our co-sponsors. And those two groups have provided wonderful Czech refreshments downstairs. So even if you have to leave, you can walk through downstairs and leave out the bottom door and grab you a cookie or two on your way out. So we'll see if you like them as much as I do. So thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much, Michaela. And as we close, we remember today, as conflict rages across the world, that even in wartime and in chaos and the fight for freedom, music remains a steadfast symbol of strength for those who dream of a better world. May you leave singing and with music in your ears. Thank you.